We'll convene the meeting of the Taxes Committee here. And Chair Lenczewski, you have a bill before us, and it is House File, let's get that. Oh, there's no House File number on it, but it was introduced today. I forget, do you remember what number it was? 1743. So Representative Chair Lenczewski, would you like to move House File 1743 for possible inclusion into the taxes omnibus report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move House File 1743 for possible consideration.
Very good. Thank you. Would you please proceed with your bill?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, before I actually just say what's in the bill, I just want to talk a little bit about why I'm carrying this bill. I think there's plenty of room for people to talk about, how things are going with the financing for the Viking Stadium, both from the folks who were for the bill and against the bill. And what I'm trying to do here is set that aside and solve what might be a problem before us. We're not quite sure, but it appears, at least in the early stages of the financing for the Viking Stadium that passed, that we're missing, the amount of revenue we need, at least in the early years here as it relates to e-pull tabs. So, we can't see what June and July and August and September, et cetera, will bring, but we know we're not going to be here after May 20th, and then we're not going to come back till sometime in 2014. So I felt that as, the person who's chairing this committee this year, it's really the responsibility of the folks who raise revenue in the two tax committees to take a look, do we need to come up with some more revenue for the Viking Stadium issue? And it isn't my intent to reopen the whole Vikings debate again. I think Minnesotans saw us make a decision here, and we should move on. It's my personal opinion. I don't have an interest in kind of renegotiating all that, but I think Minnesotans are sort of tired of these stadium debates, and I think they put a bunch of legislators here who made a decision about how to finance the stadium. It passed bipartisanly in both bodies and was signed by the governor, and so that's moving ahead. That's my opinion. The project is moving ahead and will continue to move ahead. And so the way I think about it is, if we want to be responsible about this, if we can see that there potentially is a gap coming, we should attempt to solve it now. Now, I'm certainly open to hearing from both sides here that may want to or not, but I want to be really clear that my intention is not to play any games with this. I don't have another agenda except to say that if we think there's a gap issue here, let's see what we can come up with yet before we adjourn to address that issue. So with that, Mr. Chair, the bill really is a couple of pieces, and if I may, after I mention them, I would rather have Mr. Michael clarify for the committee exactly what these tax provisions are. They are a new 10% gross receipts tax at the wholesale level on sports memorabilia, if I recall, and I would have to ask Mr. Michael, I think I wanted it drafted so the collegiate sports were out. It would just be the professional sports. And then it would also extend the existing sales tax to suites, box seats, and seat licenses in stadiums and arenas. So this really isn't the seat license issue. It's if it was used, there would be the sales tax on it, as was proposed in the governor's bill last year, and it has been being considered for sales tax-based expansion. So I'm sure people have strong opinions on these two items. But, and I'm sure we'll hear from all the teams, and I would note for the committee, I'm not aware of any teams that have not received public subsidy. And so this would be my attempt really to ask the users of the facilities and the sports enthusiasts to chip in a little bit. My anecdotal experience from folks that I've talked to both here in the legislature on both sides of the aisle and my residents is that the users generally have felt, they wanted to participate in a greater way if that can make the difference. So I want to put that out there so people can think about this. It's certainly, my intention would be if it's very politically difficult for the legislature and becomes sort of a renegotiation of the Viking Stadium issue, then I wouldn't attempt to put it into the tax bill. I'm genuinely trying to be as neutral on this whole issue as possible, but address the problems before us. I'm really committed to trying to have a gimmick-free tax bill this year, to pay back a number of shifts that are in the bill, and if we can see some financing problems coming, I think the legislature should address them. And I wish we could wait till August or September, but I think the time is now, and we do have, this committee has that decision to make whether or not it wants to fill in some gaps here on the stadium financing, and that's really the intent of my bill, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. Did you want Mr. Michael to go over the major provisions?
Yes, please, if possible.
Mr.
Yes.
Michael, would you go over the major provisions in of House File 1743?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'll just quickly outline what's in the bill. Section 1, as Representative Lenczewski mentioned, is the provision that imposes a 10% gross receipts tax at the wholesale level on sports memorabilia, which is defined essentially as items that are sold under a license granted by a professional sports league or team. So this would, as Representative Lenczewski indicated, not apply to collegiate licensed items or other licensed items. It's only by professional sports leagues. And again, this is not at the retail level, but it's at the wholesale level. If there would be a series of problems under streamlined sales tax if we tried to do this, for example, under the sales tax. It would not be permitted because it's not one of the defined base items under the streamlined agreement. Section 2 is the provision that expands the sales tax base to include seat licenses, box seats, suites, skyboxes, and so forth in stadiums and arenas. I think as most members know, when you buy a ticket to attend a professional sports game, that's an admission, and so it's subject to the sales tax. But the way the sales tax law applies, it does not apply to renting real property. So, for example, an apartment lease or an office lease is not subject to sales tax. And the way the arrangements work for suite rentals and so forth, they're not considered to be admissions to the stadium or the arena, but rather they're space rental. And so what this would do is expand the sales tax to include those items. This is an item that was both in the 2011 governor's bill and also is in the 2013 governor's tax bill. And the language that's used here is sort of an amalgam of both the 13 and the 11 governor's bill. The final provision, and I guess also it might be worthwhile to point out, as Representative Lenczewski was saying, during the stadium funding debate, there were issues about how the revenue from the actual sale of the seat licenses would be allocated. There were some members who were suggesting that that could be part of the public contribution for the stadium. The deal provided that no, those are to be team revenue sources. As Representative Lenczewski said, this provision does not change that, but simply extends the sales tax. If they opt to use that as a funding mechanism, the sale of those seat licenses would be subject to sales tax, but all of the revenue from the sale of them would still be under the original deal allocated to the team and count for their share of the contribution. The final section of the bill modifies the provisions that determine when the backup revenue sources are triggered to kick in, and essentially what this does is simply add these two new items to that calculation.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. Representative Lenczewski.
Mr. Chair, I just want to add, if Mr. Michael could talk about the ordering of the backup taxes, my intent would be to not, pass through them all and then this bill would turn on. I hope it's drafted that it would be, if passed and signed into law, it would be imposed immediately so that we didn't have to walk through the other backup taxes first. And I'm not sure that it was drafted that way. And one other piece I would add in there, and I know there is no dedication in the bill, and people have asked me this, is this going to go then for the Viking Stadium? And that is the intent. I don't like dedications, and so I don't like to put them in law like many of you do. But the intent would be if we can bipartisanly want to go forward with something on this, it would be in the tax bill, and there would be a line moving the appropriation to the financing of the stadium. So it wouldn't be for another purpose, it would be for the stadium. But I'm not sure on how the backup taxes are ordered in the bill.
Mr. Michael.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, both of the taxes I should have mentioned are effective on July 1st of this year. And so therefore they don't go into the ordering of the backup taxes. There are two backup revenue sources. The first one is the lottery game, and the second one is a tax on suites at the new stadium. Obviously, that's not a viable revenue source until the new stadium is actually built and people are spending money on suites. As to both of these taxes just simply get deposited in the general fund, and it's because of the nature of the Viking Stadium bonds, it's important that they not actually be explicitly dedicated to the stadium, because these are appropriation bonds, and bond counsel is very clear. In fact, I got a call from MMB this morning to make sure that we hadn't sort of violated the way this thing is structured by trying to explicitly channel these tax revenues to the stadium. So they simply go into the general fund, and because they're put into this mechanism for the backup, triggering the backup revenues, they will potentially delay when the backup revenues could be triggered, but that's the only real direct linkage to the stadium.
Very good. Members, any questions just on the provisions of the bill right now, either for Mr. Michael or Representative Lenczewski?
Not on provisions.
Very good. Anyone else on the provisions of the bill? Representative Garoppolo.
I'll ask for permission, Mr. Chairman, but I'm actually leaving for Commerce, so I just have a question for Representative Lenczewski. It's not on the provisions of the bill, though, but if you...
No, very good.
Is that okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Lenczewski, it seems to me that, and first of all, thanks for stepping up and actually not ignoring the problem. I was one of the people that voted for the stadium. There's lots of tape and conversations about concerns we have for it, but I voted for it. And it's obvious we have a problem, and I don't think it's right just to ignore the problem. As someone who voted for it, my recollection is you actually voted against it, and so it's even more admirable that you're stepping up to the plate to help solve a problem that you did not vote for. But, Mr. Chairman, Representative Lenczewski, what I believe is that as part of looking at this is that we should have on the table an option that the Vikings do pay a little bit more for the stadium agreement. I think that's an option that should be on the table. Without opening a can of worms and having a long, drawn-out conversation for it, are you in concurrence with me, or would you rather not comment on that, share an opinion with me on that?
Chair Lenczewski.
Mr. Chair and Representative Garoppolo, I will tell you honestly, I really was not any part of the stadium negotiation, so I don't know what opening the can of worms would even mean, and what the deal was that was struck. Not only because I was in the minority, but as you've cited, because I was a stadium opponent. So I really wasn't part of the negotiations that were going on between the advocates of the stadium. And I know many people in this room and in the legislature, both Republican and Democrat, were really working hard to get it done, and we're trading kind of ideas back and forth. Not having been privy to any of that, it isn't my interest to go down that road with this bill in this session this year. But I think there are really strong feelings about, how people should proceed with the question you raised. But it wouldn't be my intent to get into that in the omnibus tax bill this year or in this bill. It would just say, here we are, we're 5 weeks from adjournment. We won't be back till next January or February. Do we want to do something right now? And are we able to set aside how we voted on the stadium personally and see that there may be an issue coming forward? And are we willing to ask sports enthusiasts and users of the facility to participate in another way?
Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Representative Groff.
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Lenczewski, I'll resist the urge to crack a joke about how if I want something to happen, it should be in the omnibus tax bill and not be a standalone bill. But to that point, I do think that, and I appreciate your answer on it, I do think it's a reasonable conversation that we should be having about this, especially in light of the Atlanta stadium financing situation, which passed after the Vikings. And I'll remind members on a bipartisan vote last session, I offered an amendment that did a multitude of things to be more taxpayer-friendly. You were part of the coalition. I think Representative Marquardt was as well. 97 members of the House voted in favor of that amendment. And you can't get 97 members of the House to agree on what color the sky is. And so I think that there is a framework in place there which, again, protects the taxpayers, keeps the Vikings in Minnesota, but just maybe just without radically redefining the terms of that bill, has the Vikings step up. There's plenty of money on the table the Vikings can step up with. We can keep the Vikings here because we are, let's just be honest, the revenue hasn't panned out. The money's coming from the general fund, and that's not what all of us signed up for who voted for the bill. And so I think we can be sensible and reasonable about it, and we can do something. And that's kind of where I would like to see things going. I suspect that this is a conversation that will continue to, the volume will be raised between now and the end of session, but having that be part of the conversation, that the private sector is picking up some of this gap, not just the public sector, I think there's a strong bipartisan majority, at least in the House of Representatives, to help solve the problem that way. And I would like to be part of that solution without throwing rocks and tearing anything down. I got plenty of other bills to tear down, Madam Chair. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Garofalo, and I gave him, because I know you have to go to another committee, so any on just the provisions of the bill, and then I know we have some testifiers, Chair Lenczewski, I'd like to go to, and then we can go from there. So very good. So Representative Lenczewski, I do have Chair Kelm Helgen here. So if she would, you're first on the list.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
As the chair is coming forward, I had to ask Chair Kelm Helgen today what her title was. I didn't know if she was president or what the name was, so yes, the chair. So.
Yes.
Well, Ms. Kelm Helgen, good to see you. Remember last year you were very involved with all of this, so
yes.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And if you state your name then and
Yeah.
your official title.
Yes. Michelle Kelm Helgen, and I'm chair of the Minnesota Stadium Authority. Glad to be here.
Please proceed.
Okay. At this point, I guess what I'd like to do is just generally address the bill in kind of the two parts. It seems as if the bill really addresses the potential funding issue from the memorabilia tax as well as from these other ancillary taxes. From the Stadium Authority's perspective, I guess we are at a very critical time in our stadium development. We are proceeding as we were instructed to do by the legislation. We've let a lot of contracts. We've got the contract with our architectural firm that we are well into and underway with. We've got a contract with the construction firm for the overall construction of the stadium. At the same time, the way the bill was constructed, I think everyone is aware of the fact that realizing that the bonds would not be let until August or September of 2013, it was put together that the team, the Vikings, would put in the first $50 million, which would essentially pay for all these pre-construction services. So right now, while we are spending money, even though there has not yet been any state money spent, we are using the money that the team has committed and has put into the project so far. And that's the money that's being spent. Essentially what is happening at this point is we're putting all these pieces in place. The team at the same time is working to secure their financing based on the stadium legislation that was passed last year. When the stadium legislation went through, I think almost right up until the very end, there were actually 3 sources of funding that were identified as backup in the case that the pull tab revenue would come in more slowly or perhaps would fall short. The backup revenues, which you mentioned, that are currently in the bill are the lottery, the potential lottery game, as well as the eventual suite tax. The third source of revenue that was identified that was actually the largest source of revenue was the memorabilia tax. That was in the bill pretty much through most of the session, and then at the very end, in some final negotiations, it was taken out, and it wasn't replaced with anything, it was just taken out. But that memorabilia tax, from my perspective, and actually I know in talking to a number of legislators, a lot of people thought and think that it still is in the bill. That was a major source of revenue. I think that the identified money that would come from that was $8 to $10 million last year is the figure that they were using. I'm not sure what current revenue estimates are looking at, but that was last year what they were looking at. That was clearly the largest source of backup funds. I believe, looking at the original deal that was struck, so to speak, and the fact that the team and legislators were pretty much moving through the session with that in, I think that does hold true to what the original intent of the bill had been, and something that I think people could agree to. And it, as I mentioned, it was part of the deal, so to speak, pretty much through the session. I think having a source of revenue like that would probably be a good thing, as we do look at the ramp-up of the pull tabs as being much slower than what was anticipated. The one thing I want to emphasize is, if you look at the implementation, a lot of it is due to the Gambling Control Board taking time to go through very carefully and make sure that the background checks are done. I mean, the good news is there's nothing that has happened that is reflecting negatively on any of the manufacturers or distributors or anyone else. So the fact that this is slower, I think, is probably, in some ways, it's a good thing. So that being said, we obviously, with the November forecast, we need to, with the February forecast, we need to acknowledge that the revenues are definitely slow this year. And even though it's a reserve year and there's not going to be any bond payments for a considerable amount of time, we still need to acknowledge that there potentially this first year could be, as we come up to bond payments being due sometime December, January, February timeframe, there could be a shortfall. And having something like the memorabilia tax in place, I think, would probably be helpful. The one thing I would say about the other side of the coin, the suite revenue that we're talking about, the club seats, there was a lot of discussion last year when we were negotiating this bill. And there were certain revenue streams that were identified that would be in the team column. And there were certain revenue streams that were identified that were going to be in the state, but also in the authority column from the operating standpoint. And one of the things that the team had requested was, as they put this all together, they are making, if you look at the legislation, they make a very significant, essentially what would be looked at as a rent payment to the authority. A very large percentage of our operating costs are going to be coming from the team in terms of operating the stadium, so we can do all the other events that take place in the stadium throughout the year. A much bigger, obviously it's like 10 games that are played there, but a big proportion of operating money comes from the team. That was all negotiated as part of a package that said the revenue streams that come from the suites, the club seats, those sort of things are in the team column and are going to be part of their financing. Right now the team, and I don't want to speak for them, but as we're going through this whole process, one of the things that we are waiting for is for the team to get final approval on all their financing. They clearly have identified these revenue streams that have been outlined in the bill as part of their revenue. So I think we have to be careful as you look at additional taxes that are placed on those, especially before their financing go through, that we not jump the gun and change things too dramatically. Any change that would take place that would, for example, they already have gotten some loan agreements with the NFL. They had to lay out all these revenue streams very specifically in order to get that NFL loan. Now, if they would have to go back to readjust everything that was submitted, or as they're going through the financing that they're putting in place, you know, with their funding sources, it could slow down the whole project. And as you might anticipate, if we miss our schedule, we're going to be coming out with our design here like the first week in May. We are working to a very aggressive schedule. We have to break ground in October if we're going to stay on schedule in order to open in July 2016. It's already a really tight schedule. So any major changes would potentially have an impact and therefore would affect our budget. So I would really request that we kind of, as you look at this bill, that we just be careful not to open up things that could affect the schedule and really kind of change what was clearly outlined as the intent of the agreements that we had really carefully negotiated, because it was, as you all know, quite a negotiation. But I believe that the memorabilia tax had been discussed all the way along. It's a significant source of revenue. It was clearly the largest backup source that for whatever reason was kind of taken out of the bill at the end. And I think that could give a lot of cover in that if we are a little bit short as we come into next year, that would probably be a good thing to have in place. So,
Thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Helgen? Representative Ansel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to be transparent about all of this, I formerly was the executive director of the Lawful Gambling Control Board in another era. But I know just enough to be maybe helpful, maybe dangerous, I'm not sure. But my recollection of the lawful gambling piece of the bill was there was little or no attention given to the Gambling Control Board's procedures, process, approval of games, approval of distributors eligible to participate in this new electronic venture. This is a lot more complicated than I thought, and I think more complicated than the legislature as a whole thought. Consequently, we got off, or they got off, the lawful gambling nonprofits got off to a very, very slow start. And, of course, we're short of revenue. We thought that there would be 2,500 sites, in other words, 2,500 licensed beverage establishments in the state providing this gambling opportunity by last fall. And now we've learned that that's not going to be there until July of 2013. So my question is, we're looking for a little comfort here. And I don't think panic is appropriate. Would you agree that it's really dramatically too early to throw in the towel, so to speak, on the revenue projections that linked bingo and electronic pull tabs can generate?
Chair Helgen?
yes. Yes, I would agree. I think that this year was a reserve year. It was clearly anticipated to be implemented much more quickly than was probably realistic. And I don't think we've got some examples of some sites that are far exceeding expectations. There are some sites that are somewhat behind expectations. But I think it's under 200 sites that are currently doing this,
Okay.
less than 10%. So I do think it's too early to really know what the impact is.
Okay.
Thank you. Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few thoughts for me. First, Representative Lenczewski, thank you so much for the bill, at least making an attempt to solve the problem. I think you realize, as a lot of us do, that there is a problem here, and it's not going to go away. And if we don't solve it, we're going to continue to have it. And Obviously, I think obviously maybe people do or don't know this, but the ultimate backup funding source for this stadium is the general fund. We do know that the two backup sources we have now are nowhere near enough to solve the shortfall we have now. And so the ultimate source is the general fund. To Representative Anzels, let me just give you some background I have on that issue. You raised a good point. Where are we? I think you mentioned, is it short-term or long-term? You know, I was a critic of this bill. I'm not at all a stadium opponent. In fact, I'm a huge sports fan from way back. Went to Mankato State because the Vikings trained there. That was the reason for going to a college, oddly enough, as a 17-year-old thinks. That's what a 17-year-old thought back in 1985. But so back to the issue of where we're at. And, you know, the issue came out pretty quickly before the vote. We had about a week or two, if I remember right, a few days to figure out what the current funding mechanism was. You had mentioned that the taxes came out at the last minute. Everything was put together kind of shotgun right at the end. Even though there was this theoretical Viking bill, there was nothing there until the last week or two. So I got information about the fact that we were going to use e-pull tabs, and what I got was a one-page document from a member who said the pull tab revenue in Minnesota would have to go from the current $1 billion industry to $2.8 billion. And the taxes from the increase from $1 billion to $2.8 billion would fund the Viking Stadium. So I'm like, wow, how is that going to happen? But that's all I got. So then the Friday before the vote, I thought, well, I asked who came up with the projection. And the projection, as I understand it, came from the Gambling Control Board. The same people who I believe are having trouble implementing the plan. If there's someone here that can say that what I'm saying is not true, please do so. But so I called. I thought, you know, Friday before I got a big vote to make. I can't make a vote on a $1 billion stadium with a one-page document saying we're going to use e-pull tabs and it's going to save the day. So I called the Gambling Control Board and I talked to the executive director for over an hour. And we had a nice conversation about about a lot of things related to the bill. And finally, I said, "Do you have anything in writing?" And he showed me sent me a document. I looked at it, and I was not convinced. So my point is, the same people who I think we're looking at to say, well, it was unrealistic to project that many locations in the state, are the people who created the estimate. So the question I have, and I don't know who it's to, probably to Chair Helm-Helgen, is that correct? Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would like to know from the Dayton administration if they believe this is a short-term problem or a long-term problem. I think that's critical in understanding where we go. I happen to believe it's a long-term problem. You used the words ramping up of the revenue. They're slow. There could be a shortfall. You mentioned we don't want to change things too dramatically. Right now, we're 95% off of our target. If we projected $1, we're at 5 cents. I mean, we are far removed from what the plan was, and I think now is not the time to panic, but now is the time to find a solution that's responsible. And so we do need to look at every area. And whether this is it, I'm not sure. I know it doesn't fit the shortfall. I know that much. I know the 8.8 million in 2014 and the 11.9 in 15, that's not enough. Although I commend the effort, it doesn't get us there. It's not the solution. It may be part of it, I'm not sure, but it's not the solution. I would like to know, Chair, I think if the administration can weigh in on their thoughts as to whether this shortfall in their eyes is temporary or permanent. Is that possible?
Well, Chair Helgen, I mean, I know you can speak for the Sports Facility Authority, and I know Mr. Showalter and others were here, or that was before Ways and Means, I guess, maybe talking about this issue. But what can you say as far as the sports facility? Is this a long-term problem that you see, or is it something fixable ultimately?
Right. I certainly don't speak for the administration, but I will say, having been involved in looking at the pull tabs and pulling together the initial as it came out, and I will say, I do think having worked in the administration and with a lot of the legislators, the pull tabs were talked about for a long time. That was not a new, like, last minute, throw it in the last week or two of the session. that was something that was talked about at length. I mean, what the actual dates are, but I know it was clearly more than a week or two, and it was discussed in many committees at length, so I'll just say that. The only thing I will say is, as far as where we are at now, the fact that if it was already in 2,000 sites and nobody was using it, I think that would be a more clear indication that it was not going to provide any significant amount of revenue. But the fact that it's in less than 200 sites, and it's just been a case of distributors getting approved later, manufacturers, the products coming out, again, the linked bingo, and what's that going to do, I just think it's too early to tell. I really do. And it is a reserve year. I just want to emphasize the fact that part of, I believe, what was able to allow people to have some flexibility as you look at this is knowing that this first year you were not going to have bonds being sold, you were not going to have bond payments being made as the thing got rolled out. So I do think that the memorabilia tax, which was originally a backup source of revenue, looking at that, because it is a more significant source of money in addition to the other two things that are identified, I think that's wise. Because I do think you don't know at this point kind of what you don't know. It's just you have to see where the thing is going to develop. But I do believe it is going to produce revenue. I do believe that there is the original projections were based on some numbers, and there are definitely sites that are outperforming what the original projections were doing. So I just think at this point it's too early to tell, and I do think having this additional backup source of revenue probably makes some sense.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to ask if anyone from the department is here, if they could come up and talk about whether it's long-term or short-term. Maybe that's not for this bill. I think it is, but it really is important to do that. So maybe if people come up, they come up.
I don't know if there's anyone from the governor's office that can talk to that issue. I don't see anyone that's probably capable of talking to that issue.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's important, and I think we need to get a good answer sooner rather than later, because every day we don't solve the problem, every day our leverage in solving the problem to the benefit of the taxpayer goes down dramatically. Once we put the shovel in ground, we're all over. It's all done. The general fund will be hit with the gap, and I know most Minnesota doesn't want that to happen. I think people want us to solve the problem, and we need to do that sooner rather than later. So I would recommend to you and to whatever persuasion you can put on the administration to do that, because it's vitally important to do so that we can get the stadium built if it should be built. But we need to find all kinds of ways. Back to Representative Garofalo, he's right. I mean, we need to look at every source here. We can't just look at a tax to solve this problem as well. We do, the climate has changed. We know a lot more now than we did a year ago. We know that California and the LA football stadium is dead. It was privately funded to begin with. Not most people don't know that. It was $1.2 billion privately funded stadium. That is now not going to happen because the organization is not committed to it. We know that the Atlanta Falcon football stadium, there's a plan to build $1 billion stadium there with $800 million in private money, $200 million coming from the city of Atlanta, not a dime from the state. We know the 49ers are building a stadium using personal seat licenses for the majority of the public sector share of the stadium. We have all kinds of examples of how what we did a year ago should be relooked in totality so that we can get a good deal for the people of Minnesota so they're not stuck with the shortfall that they will be stuck with now if we do nothing on this particular project. Regarding the bill, well-intentioned, I'm wondering, though, because the revenue is kind of speculative, I believe we might run into a situation where we are currently with a projection on e-poll tabs where we miss the mark. I don't know how accurate we can be, and maybe I should ask this earlier to maybe staff or not, but I don't know how accurate are we with these numbers regarding sports memorabilia. because we wouldn't want to have a gap there in a year, thinking that this was solving the problem when there is the revenue doesn't come near what it should be. We already have issues with internet taxing or not taxing. People can buy things on Amazon tax-free. I think we're setting up another example where there's a inherent discrepancy between what they buy things here locally and on the internet. So I think this bill doesn't help that. How accurate are we in the numbers in this particular bill?
Chair Lenczewski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Barrett. And I should say, just, to be really clear so people know, I didn't come up with this bill in consultation with the Vikings or anyone who may testify for or against this bill. So I really just was trying to, see what might be coming. And I asked staff to just look at the memorabilia tax and then the sales tax on these other items. And so the revenue estimate is in the packet from the Department of Revenue. And I actually think they did a really good job of trying to look at, everything. And certainly for the public who may be watching, you can go online to the Minnesota House Tax Committee and you can see it for yourself. But to the sports memorabilia gross receipts tax on, what we call the memorabilia tax, I won't go into all the detail, but it's based on data from the licensing letter sports licensing report of 2010. And so data is taken from the following sports leagues as a basis for the estimate: the Major League Baseball, National Football League, National Hockey League, National Basketball Association, Major League Soccer, and it does not include sales licensed by the National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing. They go through that there were $12.5 billion of retail sales of licensed sports merchandise in the U.S. and Canada, and how they sort of attribute that out here to Minnesota down to, this percentage for the NHL, this percentage for the NFL, and then determining wholesale sales as opposed to what retail markup would be. And so I think, and then the bill is adjusted for 9 months of 2014. So I do think there's some really good work on this. But like every bill we do in this committee, it is an estimate. But if the public is interested, you can go online and see that. So thank you for the question, Representative Barrett.
Thank you. Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Chair Lenczewski. And I'm not going to go on and on here either. I appreciate, again, sincerely appreciate your effort. We need to find a solution. We need to do it soon, and it can't come from the general fund. So thank you very much.
Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair, and Representative Lenczewski. I want to say, first of all, I think it's a responsible thing for us to step up now and figure out what are supportable backups here. And I like the idea of taxing fans or gathering the revenue from fans and people who will take advantage of the stadium and actually use it. I'll be as transparent as Representative Ansels in that I know almost nothing about charitable gambling, and so I really tried hard to understand this, and it was a bit of a stretch. But you know me, I like to study things and figure it out. And while there might have been a lot of discussion behind the scenes, I have to say I feel like in the legislature we didn't have as much understanding as I would have liked in terms of how this exactly will work, because as I recall the discussion, a lot of it was, well, this is for the charitable organizations as well, and they seem to have dropped off the discussion table here since it's gotten passed. And so I listened to the Commerce Committee, and I didn't hear those questions being asked about just explaining how it would work for them. But I do seem to recall after it had passed that there were some articles in the paper that really started to look at what did this really mean for your average charity that runs a pull tab operation. And my recollection might be a little faulty, but as I recall, because the bill was so specific, and I was kind of surprised by that, it said, what the distributor gets and how much you get to charge for rent, and it had all this detail in it that I thought was kind of odd to put in statute, that when there were some articles that came out and indicated that for some charities this might not work, even if it was as successful as projected, just because their costs would go up, their rent would go up, all these things would be so much higher than the paper pull tabs, that some charities without a whole lot of volume in terms of customers, even if they like the new games, might actually lose some money. And I'm concerned right now, and I'm asking you this, Ms. Kelmhelgen, because I know you'll be involved in the ongoing discussions. I've seen a lot of speculation about, well, maybe we need to let gambling happen in new places. Maybe we should go to, supermarkets or, I don't know, all kinds of different places that you could potentially expand use of gambling. And I'm wondering if part of the take-up problem is not about the slow rollout of the games. It's that our traditional charitable gambling operations aren't yet convinced that this is going to be a good business plan for them, even if it was popular. And if you could get us some information, or if those of you in the audience who are involved with this and with charitable gambling could get us some information about that, because it just feels like it's the other side of the coin that I haven't heard a lot about, and that's what I remember a lot of the atmosphere, and quite honestly, a lot of the lobbying from some of the fans was about, and this is going to be good for our charities. And so I haven't heard a whole lot from that sector, and I would really prefer to understand that before we start creating competitors for them and other sites, and understand that. I think this is a better way to go. So I'm not going to ask you to address that, but I know you'll be in discussions, and I hope you will share that information, and I think we ought to have some public vetting of that aspect of it as well. But the question I do have for you is, my understanding is that there's an expectation of some bond sale before the next year is out. And my understanding, I know a little bit about selling of public bonds, and have worked on that end of financing in the past. And they are usually look pretty seriously at your potential revenue stream. And I'm wondering if you have had a chance yet to talk to bond counsel or anyone about, what could be the kind of the hesitancy factor that would get translated into an interest rate. Oftentimes you can get advice that they sort of want you to cover the cost plus, and what kind of ranges they want to see around that. And have you had a chance at all to explore, how we can set this up for you? Because we're not going to be in session when you're selling the bonds and the state is, and you're working on that. Can you advise us on if there's certain things we should be looking at right now to make sure that you've got a good base to get the state the best rate it can?
Chair Elgin?
I must tell you, I'm not an attorney, and I'm certainly not a bond counsel, so I would not be able to address that directly. I do know that there has been discussions with the authorities, attorneys that are bond counsel, along with MMB, and I know that they are looking at sort of what it's going to take, and they feel like the process is moving. But you would have to ask that question of, probably MMB would be the group who could address that.
Well, thank you,
Representative Wampler?
Mr. Chair and Ms. Kelm-Hogan. I will follow up on that, because I really do think all of us want to make a base that's solid, so that we don't end up paying more in interest and have more long-term costs than is necessary. And if that means that we have to get creative and put one more backup just in case, it might be one of the most cost-effective investments we could make, even though no one likes to kind of line these things up. If one more gives the market a little more confidence, it might be really worth it. And so I'd welcome that input.
Representative Zellers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Chair Lenczewski, I had a couple of pretty basic questions, and maybe just for just in case I missed it, but just for the purpose of the public as well. The tax on this, will this just be at sporting events, or is this tax collected at any point of purchase?
Chair Lenczewski?
Mr. Chair, I think the best thing is have Ms. Dalton or Mr. Michael detail it. I believe it's at any point of purchase, non-collegiate or professional memorabilia.
Ms. Dalton?
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair.
That's 4 times, Paul, I'm just saying.
Yeah, they take wrestling out of the Olympics, and then this happens. What more can I take? What more can I take? Ms. Dalton?
If it makes you feel any better, Pat, Diane and Andy at first, so it's not you.
I started a bad.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the sports memorabilia tax would not be on collegiate jerseys and things like that. It would not be things licensed under the U of M, Gophers, any of those things.
Representative Zeller?
Sure, and Ms. Dalton,
But it would be NDSU merchandise, right?
go right ahead.
Let's see, did we have more? Ms. Dalton, did you have more to add?
Mr. Chair, I guess I was doing something else, so I wasn't
That's
totally
quite
listening
all
to the
right.
question. So the question was, does it apply to everything, regardless of whether it's subject to sales tax or not?
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Ms. Dalton. So the point of sale, so if it's at Target or Walmart or Goldie's, the jersey sold at one of those, would the tax be collected there as well?
Ms. Dalton.
Mr. Chair, Representative Zellers, the answer would be yes. Anything that has that license logo on it would be subject to the tax, regardless of where it's sold. But the tax would be on the at the wholesale level when the wholesaler brings it into the state.
Representative Zellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a couple other just technical questions, Ms. Dalton. If it was, so I don't know that a collegiate, I'm trying to think if there's a place where there's at a collegiate event where memorabilia, professional memorabilia is sold, would it be collected there? So if we're selling Vikings jerseys at TCF Bank Stadium, would it be collected there?
Ms. Dalton.
And I don't know if that's actually happens. I don't know if I apologize if I don't.
Mr. Chair, Representative Zellers, yes, the location of the sale doesn't matter. What matters is whether you have that little professional logo attached, licensing thing attached to the item, essentially.
Okay. That's what.
Representative Zellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And one other question, Ms. Dalton. On page 1, there are similar items listed on line 122. What would that consist of?
Ms. Dalton.
And maybe I shouldn't ask that question.
Mr. Chair, Representative Zellers, I mean, basically it's novelty items. We didn't want to go through and list all the foam fingers, the miniature bats, the, children's, the baby bibs sold with the, Twins logo on the front. So it's just anything that pretty much has a sports logo on it would be.
Sure. Thank you.
Representative.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, it's kind of what I thought, bobbleheads and foam fingers. And the reason I asked some of those questions, too, is my two concerns, Madam Chair, and I know you're kind of picking up you're walking the ugly dog that was brought to you halfway down the street here. So my problem is always, and I got small kids, so that's always my focus. My little guy's going to go to the Twins game on Saturday in the snowstorm with his grandpa, and I'm going to tell Chuck, who already texted me, buy him the jersey this year, because if it happens next year, he's not going to be able to afford it. He wants a Zach Parise jersey because Zach Parise is his favorite player, and he wears number 11 when he plays hockey. And no offense to the Vikings and where the financing is going with this, but it's not fair because Representative Loeffler is a little incorrect. It's not everybody that goes to the games that's going to be paying this. That's why I asked where this is collected. It's collected at Target or Goldie's or wherever these products are sold. So it's not just those fans that go to the games. In fact, it hurts the fans who can't afford to go to the game probably the most because, it's not exactly a cheap date to take, 4 people to a game. Would like to, absolutely, but you're going to be taxing those people. And one of our, we did a little bit of research on the cards because I didn't know that cards would consist of that. But 40% of the baseball, football, hockey cards that are purchased by kids age 6 to 14. That doesn't include the ones. This is from the industry. That's not the ones that their parents buy for them or grandma and grandpa put in the stocking. Oh, sorry if I just ruined Santa Claus for somebody. But that's the kind of purchase that, unfortunately, is going to get hit with this. And that's just, not to go into any other options, because if you want to ask Madam Chair, I don't have the other options for you. I'm just concerned that where you're going to send this isn't going to be fair to the other sports. And nobody from the Twins or the Wild or the Vikings set me up to say it or asked me to say it. I just know that as a little guy who loves sports, my Will's going to be asking for a jersey for just about every sport. And he and I are going to have to pay an extra 10% for this, and his Wild jersey doesn't have a lot to do with the Viking Stadium other than that it's another sport. So I'm fortunately, I'm not going to surprise you, I'm sure, Madam Chair, but I'm not going to be able to support the proposal. Not that I don't empathize where you are in the situation and what hole you're trying to fill up with funds here, but I just don't think this is fair to other sports fans or sports fans who can't afford to go to the game but want to support their team.
Chair Lenczewski.
Mr. Chair and Representative Zellers, and thank you for share any thoughts on that. I will just say that, I understand there are no easy solutions. However, fans are everywhere, as you've stated, and one thing you and I might share in common, and I hate to have anyone hear this, but I think you probably listened to Joe Souchere's Garage Logic, I'll bet, or used to, and I did too. And I remember him talking about sitting in his boat in the winter just to, turn on the radio and hear the game. And fans are everywhere. They're listening in their garages and in their basements, and you're right. But fans do purchase these pieces of memorabilia, and I will give you an example. My daughter flew home for Easter, and she lives in Manhattan, and she brought a friend from Philadelphia, and one of the very first things they did was went out and bought Wild jerseys before they went to the game. And fans, these are a way that sports enthusiasts can participate in the things they believe in. So they're not, necessarily the most perfect way, but we do have an issue before us, and I will just tell you that I remember the fans in the Twins debate and in the stadiums debate coming forward and saying, put some user fees on here. Let us help you. We want this. So that's what I remember. Other people may have different feelings about that, and I really am trying to just stay out of the whole reopening of the whole issue, and just look at the issue before us and see if we can't come up with some revenue. And I understand that the Timberwolves and the Twins and others, like you said, probably weren't doing that for them. But they have received public subsidy as well, and I don't think there is any group that's contemplated in the bill that did not receive significant public subsidy from the taxpayers at some time. So I think it makes it a bigger problem for retailers to sort of say, is this the Wild or the Vikings or the Twins? So I hear you, and I hope you hear me in this. I'm just trying to see what we can come up with together before we adjourn, and then we're not back till January.
Representative Zeller.
Now it is appropriate to say, Madam Chair. And I know you're probably going to address the online sales as well, but my other concern, should that not be addressed, is some of our retail locations that would be at a competitive disadvantage, and albeit they're good companies, but I'd rather not have eBay or somebody else, Amazon or somebody else, get the sale. I'd rather see Goldie's get it. Don't tell Target and Walmart that, but I'd rather see some of our smaller owned memorabilia shop, Dave's Sporting Goods up in Maple Grove sells a lot of jerseys up there. I'd rather see them get the sale than online, and I have a inkling you'll probably fix that issue this session, but that's my concern as well. And I get the point about the public subsidies, but again, and I'm not going to offer my comments or solutions on where you could have it closer to the game and the facility. But I just think from a standpoint of a fan that doesn't get to attend a lot of games, and want to show our support, I just don't think it's a good idea to make it a little bit more expensive for your daughter, her friend, or for my little guy, Will. But thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you. And next we have Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this first thought was going to go to Chair Marquardt, but you probably would share his sentiment in mind that we are really irritated that wrestling is out of the Olympics now. That really bothers him. It bothers me. But we're also really happy, I think, and maybe you could share your thoughts, and I have, and my two daughters have, that rugby is now going to be an Olympic sport starting in 2016. So we can all rejoice in that rugby will be an Olympic sport.
Well, Representative Barrett, I can just say that my high school was often had people in the state wrestling championship, and we now have a really active rugby group that's active in my community. So I would love to see both of them and many more fans, I suspect, would share that.
Let me just follow up on a thought I had earlier because I actually failed to mention it regarding whether the issue here is going to be temporary or permanent. We had some people come in about a week or two ago to our tax committee, a lady who runs the Bingo Emporium in rural Minnesota. And while the bill wasn't about the Viking Stadium, she did have some taxes that were thrust upon her that she wanted relief from, because she's not going to be one of the e-pull tab and e-bingo emporium places. And we asked her about that. She said something that I've heard so many times from other people. And that is that people don't want it. the clientele, the people that play pull tab and even bingo are of a certain demographic that enjoy the camaraderie that goes with the games. And I can assure you, I agree with that because in college in Mankato, I did some pull tab. I was in a pull tab booth at American Legion, and there's a lot of camaraderie around that. A few people buy some tickets and they sit down, and for the next hour they pull their pull tab off, and sometimes they pull it off all the way, and sometimes they pull it half off and have a drink and do it a little later. So the question is, and I think I know the answer, which is then it's a permanent problem because the format is not conducive to raising the revenue by 180%. And I've heard that from many, many people, and it really has supported my thoughts. And so I think we have to realize and recognize this, and this is a permanent problem. Certainly the information we have now supports that thought that we're down 95% from what we expected. So to say it's temporary, I don't think is accurate. And I think we need to look at this as a long-term problem that needs a long-term solution that is commensurate with the problem at hand, which is roughly $30 million a year or so off from what we need to do the bond. So this might not be the forum for that, but if we don't solve it, the taxpayers will have to pony up through the general fund, or it's going to hurt our schools or our other parts of our government that are critical. So I just leave you with that comment.
Representative Lenczewski.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And Representative Davids?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I too want to thank Representative Lenczewski for bringing this forward. It's not, at this point, really something I think I could possibly support, but I was thinking about a few things, and I was thinking, and don't worry, it doesn't happen that often, but when you look at the Timberwolves, Twins, and Wild subsidizing, in effect, the Vikings, and I'm not critical of you because we got a big hole here we got to figure out what to do with. And so I hope these discussions continue. We do fix this before we adjourn. But we've talked about the T-Wolves, the Twins, and the Wild. Maybe a question for Ms. Dalton. If you have a Packer fan that buys a Packer jersey, would they then, in effect, be subsidizing the Minnesota Vikings?
Madam Chair, Representative Davids, if they buy it here in Minnesota, yes, they would.
I may reconsider my position on this bill, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Lilly.
Cubs?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members, and Representative Lenczewski, thank you for working on this solution to a problem that we need to address. It's interesting, as a policymaker, in the last couple of years, I just came up from downstairs and I'm on the Legacy Committee, and so you have a situation where the voters said, these different groups basically said, please tax us. So they said, please go out and protect our waters, go out and get us money to help in parks and trails, get us more trails, get us more land to hunt and fish on. And so that went to the voters, and it passed really overwhelmingly. And and then last year, I remember one of the legislations that went through Environment Committee was interesting too, and it was the hunter and fishing group, and it said, hey, we like to fish, we like to hunt, and or the fishing fees, we'd like to, please tax us more, because we want more access to lakes, and we're concerned about enough DNR out there helping do good work. Well, it's no secret to Representative Zellers. I mean, I know you know who was in the room on the Vikings in the last couple of years, and I was there. And the minority members were pretty clear on saying user fees, or really the goal was those that, I know it repeatedly, we talked about it, those that benefit, those people that are going to the game should pay. So this bill here was proposed, this idea, and the idea is exactly that those buying the jerseys, and it may not be perfect, but maybe this goes to a bigger pool at some point that would help excel when they come back again, or it comes back, down the road, and I would have went farther. I probably would have included colleges myself and dealt with those issues because we're going to have the basketball team's talking about a new training building, or we can't get a decent team. So just on and on. But those that benefit, I don't go to many games, but it just shocks me how much people are willing to pay. And I will bet that your son will still have a jersey. I will bet that he'll have more than one jersey. I will bet that he'll have more than 2 jerseys through his the next couple of years, and your daughter, I hope too. Okay, and I don't think it's really going to impact people. I mean, it really goes to the heart of those that benefit should pay. I mean, it's a pretty basic principle, and I think it's a real easy sell to Minnesota. Minnesotans are going to get it and buy into it. I get that it was a tax, or we even tried calling it maybe a fee. That might have worked in years past, and that one didn't work. We were in a minority, but I know that this was talked about, and there was both parties were there. Everybody, but is it perfect what's happening now? I mean, it's really clearly unfortunate. It's not an ideal situation, but I'm glad that the chair, Lenczewski, is stepping up. I mean, this is probably the last bill I could ever possibly imagine that she would have in her submitted or in her arsenal. I just almost am in shock, and that she's even. I just can't even imagine this. So, to her credit, though, but she's willing to step up and do a fix. I think this is the right thing. Those that benefit are going to pay for it, and I could go on. I can be more specific. I'm not going to, but I think this is a real solution, and thank you for bringing it forward.
Thank you. And Representative Benson.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, when we began here, Representative Garofalo made a number of comments. He and I end up kind of in the same boat because I voted for the stadium bill. I also voted for the Garofalo amendment because I felt that the Vikings could definitely have contributed more to the construction. And so I have a sense of personal responsibility to help resolve the situation since I was one of the folks who voted for it. And I voted for it for a couple of reasons. One of them, 3 reasons. One, professional sports is played this way with communities and states, and that's just a reality. So, I couldn't change those rules. So the question was, are we going to keep this professional team or not? The second one was that I was determined that the funding for this stadium would not require money from the general fund. I told my constituents that. I think my district was pretty evenly divided, although I saw a lot of Vikings folks from my district all painted up, demanding that I vote for this thing, too. I remember that. I also remember that a number of years ago, former Representative Solberg had presented a proposal that had many of these elements, calling for a fee or a tax on sports memorabilia. So it's been around a long time, this issue. The third reason I voted for the bill is because the legislature had been dealing with this issue for 10, 15 years, and there comes a time when you have to step up and either vote yea or nay, just like maybe the Congress of the United States will finally face a moment of truth this Thursday when they have to vote on what they're going to do about gun violence in this country instead of running and hiding behind filibusters or whatever it is. So you're elected to make decisions. Sometimes the decisions don't turn out so good. But then you have a responsibility to clean up the mess if it turns out to be a mess. I still have some hope that these electronic poll tabs are going to do better as the numbers increase and they get into, bingo. lottery and all that if they do that. So I do hope that this solution doesn't have to be permanent. But right now, we were elected to make a decision, and we have to fess up and deal with it. We should not leave this legislature this spring without coming up with an alternative. So I'm willing to take the heat. Everybody else should too.
Thank you. And Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if Revenue is here, Department of Revenue, if they had any concerns about the imposition of a tax that they're forced to collect on someone else's behalf. Well, my 911 bill was up the other day, Madam Chair, and Revenue said they had concerns about collecting a tax for someone else, and maybe they don't this time. I don't know. That was probably just a rhetorical question, Madam Chair. I won't make them answer that.
Thank you. And not seeing anyone else, we do have a long list of testifiers, and maybe it's time for us to move to that. And Representative Dabney, do you want to jump in? I just hadn't seen anyone on the list for a while, and we have another 5 or 6 people here.
Well, Madam Chair, I'll just be brief. There's been some, I think Representative Lilly indicated that he would be comfortable with an expansion on the memorabilia to collegiate sports. I think you said that. I don't mean to put words in your mouth. I'm looking at the sales tax admission to boxes and suites, and I'm wondering if some of the rationale, maybe a question to the author, Madam Chair, is that those boxes and suites are often a business expense that gets deducted by a business that buys a suite. In fact, I got a guy, I know a guy, just took a job with one of the major mortgage lenders in the state on Monday. And he's going to, is there a Timberwolves game tonight? Yes, on the road. Oh, on the road. He's going to some professional sports game tonight in the corporate seats. He started on Monday. He's there on Wednesday.
Representative Dabney, if it's a
You're looking
game
for a
of
point?
the Twins, I think that's probably a rite of initiation.
Perhaps. But I'm just wondering if is the deductibility by business of the purchase of these suites and boxes part of the rationale here, Madam Chair?
Representative Lenczewski.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Dabney. I had not thought of that at all. Mr. Michael may want to jump in. The second part of the bill that's not sports memorabilia is simply if it's to impose the sales tax on the menu here. Mm-hmm. So I'm really not trying to get involved in the seat license issue or what's going to happen with suites. I think there was some confusion when I earlier introduced the bill. But as far as the deductibility as a corporate expense, I would look to the House research to say definitively if that's possible. My guess is it may be.
Mr. Michael.
Madam Chair, Representative Dabney and Lenczewski, very complicated. It's entertainment expenses. They're not very deductible anymore. Congress has severely limited the deduction, particularly for suite rental. I would not be willing to try to describe the rule off the top of my head without going back and checking it, but there's very little. There's not a lot of tax benefit for those expenditures anymore.
Madam Chair, I repeatedly have the experience of simply being grateful that I am on the Minnesota House Tax Committee, because we get into such interesting things and I get to learn stuff.
And
so thank you.
And Representative Dabney, if we didn't have such smart staff, we wouldn't have near as much opportunity to learn good things.
Well, Madam Chair, I get to learn stuff and I get to be corrected gently but forcefully. And frequently. Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Lenczewski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, members, I think back to last year, too, and remember pieces of what happened. And, this was a bad idea from the start. And, it's unfortunate we're already now considering another subsidy and in the form of another bill that we heard earlier today. And I think it was Representative Lesch that in his in his questions earlier were talking about some of the other Northwest Airlines and some of the other past examples that have resulted in similar ways. And so I think it's instructive. I remember back realizing the business agreement that came out of the whole negotiations. Now, the governor and his staff had some people that negotiated with the Vikings and the city of Minneapolis and some others, and they came out with a business arrangement. Well, the legislature didn't have input in that business arrangement. They just basically dropped that on our laps and said, here it is, authors, you guys write the bill. That's what I remember. And where were the people of Minnesota representing that business arrangement? Now, we look at Atlanta now, 20%, Representative Barrett, $200 million out of their billion-dollar stadium. We're paying 60% here in public funds to this stadium. The business arrangement deal we got was not a deal for the people of Minnesota. And I think we have to acknowledge that. And Representative Lenczewski, I see one very good thing in you bringing the bill is we're seeing people actually admit here, and we've heard enough of what, I'm not a psychologist, but when you have a problem, the first step to solving is admitting there's a problem. And to find yourself in denial, whether it's a body, whether it's the legislature or members of the legislature, or whether it's a governor that says, well, I didn't know that personal seat licenses were in the bill and that was something reserved for the Vikings. Well, it was very clear that that was reserved for the Vikings. It was talked about in depth. And, the failures of this particular funding mechanism were talked about over and over again. I remember very clearly that every gambling establishment in Minnesota would have to triple their gross revenues to make this model work. Triple. And when I talk to people out in the district who manage these establishments, they say there's absolutely no way. So I am glad, Representative, that you're bringing this, just because at least it signifies that there are some people around here that are not in denial of the fact that there's a problem. I think we're on our way to recovery if we're admitting there's a problem, and so I appreciate you bringing this bill for that reason. I'm not going to be in a position to support the bill if I have a question about it. I'm wondering if this is a permanent tax or a temporary one, and Madam Chair, is there going to be a sunset date, realizing that it's intended to be to pay off this mistake that we made here? Are you going to sunset it afterwards? And I don't see that in the bill.
Representative Lenczewski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I will ask Mr. Michael if he can to repeat the issue related to the dedication. I mean, it certainly could be like any sales tax, or it could be sunsetted at some point. But it's not written to dedicate it per se, as there's an issue with the bond houses as how they would read that provision if it were in there together. So I don't know how a sunset would affect that same issue. So maybe, I know members we're at committee deadlines, so lots of members are in other meetings voting. But if Mr. Michael wouldn't mind repeating the connection there between dedicating it to the stadium.
Mr. Michael, another opportunity to educate us.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the Vikings Stadium is going to be funded with appropriation bonds. And appropriation bonds, the only security for them is the appropriation from the general fund to pay them. And so there is no dedication and there's no direct connection between the deposit of this tax and the amount of security for the bonds, except in the extent that this increases the size of the general fund, I suppose. The only connection that's in the bill is that these two revenue sources are added to calculation of whether the backup revenues are triggered or not. Whether or not there is no sunset on it, so this tax is as permanent as any Minnesota tax is. The legislature obviously can cut it or repeal it at any time. I don't know, the bond council, when the General Vikings deal was being negotiated, was very sensitive about not having linkage between specific taxes or revenue sources and payment of these bonds. I don't know that it would be a problem if you put a sunset, if you guessed when the last bond would be paid off and you put a sunset on it at that point. Nobody asked, that question never came up and was asked of bond counsel. I don't know what the answer would. My instinct would be that you could do that if you wanted and it wouldn't create a problem, but I don't know.
Representative Lenczewski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Drazkowski, I'd be happy to hearing that, work on that, and think about that as if it's not going to create a problem. There doesn't seem that it couldn't be sunsetted.
Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one last comment, and thank you, Representative Lenczewski. Of course, we realize that there's no tax as permanent as a temporary tax, but the value I would see, Madam Chair, is that probably none of us will be around here when we get done paying off the bill, and then I'm just hopeful that there is a responsible group of legislators that will actually allow it to sunset. Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Zellers.
Yeah, actually, Madam Chair, thank you. And Representative Chesky, my question was along the same lines as a sliding scale tied to the pull tab revenue. So as revenues go up, your percentages or your collections go down. But I remember that same conversation that Mr. Michael was talking about, which was if you do that, the bond houses get skittish on approving. So as an idea, again, from the cheap seats, that's worth what you're paid for it. And to your Representative Dabney, I think to your question, I think the only thing you can still deduct, which makes it almost inconsequential or useless, is the food. Because the sweet is a special privilege and alcohol usually hasn't been. So I think it's just the food, so that's a small part of it. And Mr. Michael would know better than I, but my last comment, Chair Lenczewski, is I do appreciate that this is not tied to new gambling, as some others have suggested a Racino or another casino downtown or something like that. Although I'm not a fan of your bill, I do appreciate you not introducing that into this discussion as well, because I think there's been a pretty good agreement in place now with that, with all groups on that side, and I would not like to have that come into this part of the conversation. So I do appreciate that.
Thank you. And now Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the author of the bill. And I apologize if this has come up. I've been moving in multiple committees the last hour, but I'm just thinking ahead of stadium gets built and the Rolling Stones come to town, and I'm sure they'll be here when it's built. And I go to the concert and I buy a T-shirt, a Rolling Stones T-shirt, for warmth or whatever. I probably have to pay $100 for a Rolling Stones T-shirt at that time. Would that be something? I know I've had constituents who've asked me before about when artists come to town, very wealthy artists come to town and have memorabilia, whether it's to any of the venues that we have. Is there a way to capture some of that revenue for events? And if that's been discussed and if you've talked about that before, I'd be interested in that.
Representative Lenczewski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Mr. Michael is the best person to ask that. It's not contemplated in this bill. Mr. Michael can probably.
Thank you, Mr. Michael.
Madam Chair, Representative Hansen, I've not heard of all of the proposals relative to sports facilities have focused on licensed sports memorabilia. I've not heard anybody, specifically propose or have drafted or estimates prepared for non-sports memorabilia like arts organizations or rock bands or whatever. I suppose in theory you could do that. I think you'd get into many sort of line drawing questions that might be difficult to sort out.
Representative Hansen.
Madam Chair, and Representative Lenczewski, though, that these facilities are used by as venues for businesses that are entertainment that come to town, and are here for a day or two and then leave that are using the public facilities and making a lot of money off of it. So there's a lot of memorabilia that's sold, and just wondering, maybe that's something for another day, but I think it's a worthwhile discussion to look at.
All right, I think we'll move to testimony, and we have Ted Johnson first. Welcome to the committee, and introduce yourself for the record. Let us know who you represent.
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Ted Johnson. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Minnesota Lynx, and I'm here to testify in opposition of the proposal in front of you. Before I get to my points, though, I would say the most disconcerting thing I've heard today, though, is in all the conversation about sons and daughters wanting various memorabilia, not one has mentioned our 2011 world champion Minnesota Lynx. So if you haven't gotten your jersey yet, certainly it'd be a great time to go out there. Going to have a fabulous season this year. So it might be a good time. So I would say that you're probably, in hearing from all the other professional sports teams, I think you have an audience that appreciates the complexity and the difficulty of the decisions you're wrestling with. Certainly we understand. And we have a sympathy for using sales tax mechanisms. Certainly we stand to be the beneficiary of such a concept thanks to the Minnesota legislature last year in language that allows us to work with the city of Minneapolis to update our facility. But we do differentiate to a degree a sales tax imposed on a facility for the benefit of the tenants of the facility, or a broad-based set of entertainment taxes that are used for a broad range of entertainment projects and proposals, versus a targeted tax leveled at all professional sports teams for the benefit of only one of the sports teams. The other concern we have is, you heard from Chair Calum Halligan, the complexities of these negotiations and financing. We have been, for the better part of 9 months, negotiating with the city of Minneapolis. To use an analogy, the shot clock is winding down. We're late in the fourth quarter. The ball is in the hands of Lindsey Whalen or Ricky Rubio. We're very close, and we have concerns about the certainty of revenue. Just like the Vikings negotiation, a lot of this is dependent upon having accurate sort of accounts for revenue, future revenues. How does that relate to our contribution? I think that the legislature will be very happy sort of when we finalize our deal that we've been able to make a lot of movement as our team to the level of our contribution from what was initially discussed. But how we've been able to do that is around sort of certainty of revenues, and we have a concern that something like this late in the game has a chance to disrupt that carefully negotiated deal that we're very close to. The third sort of concern that we have is really sort of the ripple effect. You know, we are a business in which a relatively few number of fans subsidize a large number of seats. In our venue, we can afford to have nearly 4,000 seats in Target Center for under $10, largely because we have a few fans that are willing to pay quite a bit of money. And so we have a concern that and when you talk about the suite tax specifically, that's targeted at our most distressed inventory. Back when it was a Metrodome and Target Center, there were very few suite premium products in the marketplace. There's now quite a few. It's probably our most depressed piece of inventory we have. And as you create more barriers to selling that product, we have a fear that that decreases revenues, and it really creates a ripple effect throughout our arena. So with those concerns, that's why we're here today. But again, it's not to say that we live in an ivory tower. We understand. We've been involved in these conversations for many years. We understand it's a very difficult issue. It's very complex. Everyone here is trying to find the right solution, and so we appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And Representative Barrett has a question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Mr. Johnson, I'm wondering, do you guys start up in October, late October? I believe your season ends in April or May or hopefully June.
Correct. Training camp October 1, the regular season about November 1.
So I'm wondering then, Madam Chair, Mr. Johnson, do you ever play Sunday games during the fall and winter at home?
Typically not. Madam Chair, Representative. Typically not. We typically start Sunday games right around January.
Okay. And my question there, thank you, Madam Chair, is do you consider the Vikings to be somewhat of a competitor as it relates to the dollars that you receive for what really is a luxury for most people? Do you consider them to be a competitor to some extent?
Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative, I think that we're friendly competitors. We certainly are supportive of each other. But depending on certain products and certain times in certain areas, there's only so many dollars to go around, certainly.
Representative Barrett.
And then just one final question. Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Johnson. So with this bill, you would be, in effect, kind of subsidizing a competitor.
Mr. Johnson.
Madam Chair, Representative, I think that's one of our concerns.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And next I have Jeff Pellegrim from the Minnesota Wild. Welcome to the committee.
There you go.
And if you could introduce yourself for the record, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Jeff Pellegrim. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Minnesota Wild Hockey Club. And I appreciate the opportunity to address the House Taxes Committee today. I'm here today to share the Wild's perspective on and point of view on the proposed sports memorabilia suite rental tax to help fund the Viking Stadium and the challenges we already face as managing a public facility, which is the Xcel Energy Center in St. Paul. As I've testified before, the Minnesota Wild generally supports public participation in the investment in professional sports stadiums, and more specifically, we've, over last year and this year, supported the building of the new Viking Stadium. I've witnessed firsthand the positive community impact of a strong and healthy professional sports environment, and I've also witnessed the business and community revitalization that comes with a state-of-the-art facility like these buildings bring, and on the west side of St. Paul, you certainly see that. But to be clear, the Wild are generally opposed to sources of revenue that tax our fans specifically, yet do not benefit them or the arena. And we've consistently supported a more global approach that would benefit all of the public sports facilities more equitably, and we continue to do that. So, to that point, a significant imbalance already exists in the public funding of stadiums, like the Wild, the Twins, and Timberwolves, and Vikings are all tenants of publicly owned facilities. Through the Wild's initial investment in our lease and pilot payments, the Wild pays 86% of the total investment in Xcel Energy Center, compared to 34% for the Twins with Target Field and 50% proposed for the Vikings in their new stadium. And also, unlike facilities such as Target Center, which they just spoke with the Timberwolves, the Xcel does not receive public or city subsidy to cover its losses in the concert business. Those can be significant over in the Target Center. So all of these things put the Wild, their fans, and the city of St. Paul at significant disadvantage. Given this, it seems in plain terms unfair to us that there would now be an additional tax on sources that would tax hockey fans and benefit only a new Viking Stadium. In order to avoid the state picking winners and losers among public facilities, we believe it is critically important that the legislature and the governor either structure revenue streams that benefit everyone or explore alternative funding sources altogether. With that, I'll thank you for your time and appreciate the fans and legislative support as the Minnesota Wild works toward bringing a Stanley Cup to the state of hockey. And I'll take questions.
Yeah. Thank you.
Madam Chair, is there any guarantee on a win at St. Louis tomorrow night? As long as we got you here and in the seat, I can really press you.
Unfortunately, Madam Chair and Representative Zellers, if we had Chuck Fletcher here, I would like to ask the same question. As the CFO, I wonder about that also, but we certainly hope we have a success against the St. Louis Blues tomorrow night.
Well, thank you. We always wish you success. Yes, Rick.
I just noticed it's not a question, but as a St. Paul rep, I always appreciate having the Wild up here. Thank you, Mr. Pellegrim. And I noted that we just had the Timberwolves testify, followed by the Wild. And they both testified that they didn't appreciate essentially being taxed for the benefit of a competitor. But I note that really this is just one big pool we're dealing with here, Madam Chair. And in the past year, Representative, I think it was, is it Representative Dabney, are you working on that deal with Minneapolis and St. Paul, the competition between the arenas? So Representative Dabney's working on it. I think Representative Mahoney is as well. And so we're inevitably in a closed system, Madam Chair. One team is directly affected by the other, and teams wait in line to get their new stadium. We weren't going to pass a Twin stadium the same year we passed a Viking stadium. There's a certain amount of time you have to wait. You kind of get in the queue here. I'm sure we're going to be having another one come up here soon. And I'm sure Mr. John will come talk to me about a basketball stadium, even though I just don't know anything about basketball. Lushes are hockey players. But you're okay. Well, you can talk to Ansel's about basketball. He knows about that. But I think it is inevitably we're all in this together, Madam Chair, and I do appreciate them coming up and testifying to this. But I don't know how we ultimately extricate the teams from each other, because we're all in bed together.
And with that, I think we're going to go to our next testifier. Thank you. And we have Dave St. Peter here. We know he was here earlier, but I don't know if he's still here and would like to testify. Yes, he's welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members, my name is Kevin Smith. I'm a senior director with the Minnesota Twins. I am a relief pitcher here this afternoon, as Mr. St. Peter, my boss, had something else come up that needed his personal attention. So I appreciate the opportunity. I think, having followed the Timberwolves and the Wild, I can go back to the clubhouse tomorrow and tell Joe Mauer he's not the only guy who's batting in the third hole this week here for baseball. Like our competitors and friends, we at the Twins have some concerns about this legislation, and it really comes down to, for us and for our fans, it comes down to the accessibility and affordability of our game, with the memorabilia tax as well as the suite tax. We, as an organization, have really prided ourselves on making baseball affordable. We play 81 games a year at Target Field that we are very appreciative of. We understand what it took to get Target Field built, and we think we have developed quite a good public-private partnership. You'll see out now a handout that we're handing out that I think kind of shows. I don't need to go into all the numbers. You all have no numbers better than I do, but since the onset of Target Field, you'll see the taxes in our. This is just Twins and our concessionaire sales and use taxes since the opening of Target Field, and we think that we have done a lot so far, and we'll continue to do our part with raising revenues in this fashion for these various things. And one of the things we really want to emphasize with you all is that we really need to focus on keeping this game available to our fans. Representative Zeller's son, who might want to come down and buy a Twins hat or a jersey, we want to make sure that they can afford to do that. We demonstrate our affordability, I think. If you look at our games, we have $8 tickets. We have $10 tickets. We sell hot dogs for $1. I don't know that I can buy a hot dog for $1 at any high school hockey arena anymore. We have student day tickets for $5, which is kind of a nice value, half as much as a movie. So affordability is really what it comes down to for the Twins, and we think with what we have been able to produce in tax revenue in the first 3 seasons and now early in the 4th season of Target Field speaks to that nature of a great public-private partnership, which we think we can continue in the status quo.
Thank you. And Representative Benson had a...
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Just not a snarky comment, hopefully, but every time I purchase something, some of it goes off to pay for the Twins Stadium. And all these representatives, I understand why they're here, suggesting that this type of tax would not be helpful to them, but none of them have come forward with any suggestions as how we meet this problem we have. And I think it's incumbent on people who suggest, don't tax me, tax the man behind the tree, that they identify who that person is. So there's no free lunch in this country, and it certainly wasn't free for any of the voters of the state of Minnesota to pay for the Twins Stadium, or now to help support, the stadium for the Timberwolves, and it's certainly not for the Vikings either. So I just think it's time for those who got a lot of benefit from the public that they come forward and they suggest some alternative sources, not just say, don't vote, thank you for everything you gave us, and now don't expect anything more from us, because we got ours. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And seeing no other questions, we're going to move now from the sports to the retailers. And if Rochelle Westland has been patient enough to wait, we'd love to hear your comments.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am Rochelle Westland, and I represent the Minnesota Retailers Association. And we're here to speak in opposition to this bill in two parts. One in the clothing and the other to sports equipment. In regards to sports equipment, a lot of younger teams use logoed items, whether that be hockey sticks, baseballs, baseball bats, in their practice and in their teams. We want younger generations to be able to play sports and to have sports be affordable, and to have this additional tax on those items would possibly be cost prohibitive to some of those younger individuals that would like to play in sports. The second item of concern to the retailers is for clothing. Minnesota currently does not have a sales tax, and it's something that on clothing, and it's something that we use as a draw for tourists that come in and spend money in the state of Minnesota, and we don't want to lose that competitive advantage. Furthermore, we fear that at 10% that this could be an incentive for people to start shopping online. As you know, there's already an unlevel playing field for online out-of-state companies who do not have to collect sales tax. This would be a 10% disadvantage to Minnesota bricks and mortar retailers, and we are quite concerned to make sure that we have a level playing field in this arena as well.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Otherwise, Representative Lenczewski, I think is there anyone else who wanted to testify for or against House File 1743? That's who I had on my list. Seeing no one, Representative Lenczewski, any concluding comments?
Just appreciate everybody's testimony and every committee member's input.
Thank you, and with that, we will lay over House File 1743 for possible inclusion, and would like to thank everyone for staying for a long hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned.